Western cinema changed completely in the 1970s. Blockbusters like Jaws and Star Wars created the multiplex generation. Commercial filmmakers discovered that things like dinosaurs and extraterrestrials, things which scare us but which we've never seen, are what we want to see. We want to see a spectacle. I did this one in Gladiator because I too love a spectacle.
Today is your most fortunate day.
Those giraffes you sold me, they weren't meat.
But at the same time as the emergence of the blockbuster, and unnoticed by most of us, filmmakers in Iran were heading down a very different path. They became the most acclaimed directors in the world. As an Iranian, I'm intrigued by this. When most of world cinema is becoming more and more escapist, filmmakers in the country of my heritage were heading in a totally different direction, towards everyday life and contemplation. Who are people like Dariush Mehjui and Abbas Kiarostami, and why have they taken the serious film world by storm? And what makes their films so exciting? So sit back and relax. This documentary by film commentator Mark Cousins starts in New York by asking why we go to the movies in the first place.
If I could never go to a cinema again, I would die. If I could never go to movies again, I would cry.
The movie is just a great thing, great place to go. It's really fun, all the lights, and I love the big screen. I mean, technology is really amazing, so why not enjoy it?
It has to be funny or very scary.
Yeah. I don't know, I like really dramatic movies.
I like the action, the fighting. Let's see.
Well, I like to kind of take myself out of the crazy world we're living in and live in the world they're in. It's a fantasy, right?
Hollywood invented the kind of thrills these people are talking about. It excites us with stories, but also, and this is important, with the language of cinema itself. Take this ordinary shot on 42nd Street, New York. Not very interesting. But Hollywood would do this to it. And then this. And it cuts like this. And makes these edits sound like this. And adds music like this. This is turbocharged filmmaking. It makes people stand out from the crowd. Makes them look determined or heroic. But there are other types of movie language. A short taxi ride away from glittery 42nd Street at the Lincoln Center. These people are going to see an Iranian film, Where is the Friend's House? By Abbas Kiarostami, about a boy who takes his friend's homework book home by mistake and spends the rest of the film trying to return it. As the naturalism in this scene shows, it contains one of the great child performances in cinema, 4 years before the far better known one in Steven Spielberg's E.T. The style of Kiarostami's film captured the boy's quest and rooted it in the realities of village life.
این احمد ما نبود در پشت چه کار داره؟
Kiarostami had been a graphic designer, and this showed in how he manipulated nature by cutting this path in the hillside.
I was thinking at one point that I was thinking about the movie while I was watching the movie, and what a luxury that is.
He does a lot of things in real time, which is very slow for usual American moviegoers, you know, running up that hill again and again and again, and long conversations where the kid can't break into it and the adults are kind of ignoring them and nobody seems to be listening.
You know, the details of a particular place can tell you so much about a person. And I think it's the details that make it universal.
Kiarostami's eye for detail took him to the heights of movie acclaim. As we'll see, the origins of Iranian cinema lie in the late 60s and early 70s, but in the 1980s, Kiarostami emerged as its poster boy.
Unbelievable.
For me, Kiarostami is one of the 2 or 3 great living filmmakers. I mean, there's no question that the work he produced, especially in the 1990s, is of the highest caliber. And really, I think, he's one of the 2 or 3 key figures working today.
He is, as far as I'm concerned, the best. He's influenced absolutely everybody who's important.
But there's far more to this than one great director being acclaimed around the world.
And many of the figures who began making films or whose work we became aware of, such as Abbas Kiarostami, Amir Naderi, again Darius Merjoui, a few others, were people, in fact, who had worked before 79. There were also people like Makmal Baf and eventually Jafar Panahi and whatever, who were post-revolutionary figures, but there was a good sense of continuity with what went on before. So you could say the seeds were sown, and once the nation stabilized enough after just towards the end of the Iran-Iraq War, the cinema came out again.
As Peña implies, 2 generations of filmmakers have emerged since the 1960s. And they're all great image makers. How come? Isn't America the country of imagery? Doesn't it know better than anywhere how to seduce us? The answer appears to be no.
A society that I think many in the West had written off in terms of cultural production, thinking that nothing could really come from a society that was ruled by Sharia, by, religious stricture, where mullahs were in power. And suddenly here was this deeply humanist, very satisfying, very surprising cinema.
Why have the modest, often unresolved stories of Iranian cinema been so acclaimed? Surely the essence of movies is what these people on 42nd Street were talking about. Can it really be true that a country which had nothing to do with the invention of cinema, which is not technologically advanced, which is not rich, whose religion is suspicious of imagery, whose artists aren't free, is at the cutting edge of cinema? And can the West, which invented cinema and continues to control much of it, really be falling behind? There's only one place to answer these questions. Iran. Tehran, February 2005. Producers, sales agents and distributors from Europe, the Middle East and Asia, as well as members of the public, are here for the annual Fajr Film Festival. During the next week, the Iranian film world will show its wares to these people and to local cinephiles.
همه رو می‌بینیم تقریبا
ما ایرانی و خارجی همه رو می‌بینیم.
بله چون به هر حال ایرانی که کشورمونه باید ببینیم کشورمون در چه سطحیه مقایسه کنیم با فیلم‌های خارجی.
حرف جوونا رو بزنم مسائل جامعه رو بگم ولی در قالب طنز نه زیاد ناراحت کننده.
Many in this city of 20 million people, twice the size of London, are oblivious to all of this. But to those who have followed the rise of Iranian cinema, and that includes many Iranians themselves who are proud of the acclaim, the film festival is a chance to see if new talents are emerging and whether the boom time for Iranian cinema is coming to an end. To find out where and why the boom started, we went back to his origins. The first Iranian film to achieve international acclaim was made by this man, Darius Merjoui, in 1969, 10 years before the revolution. Merjoui's film The Cow, which is about a man who's so fond of his cow that when it dies he starts to behave like it, was one of the films that kick-started Iranian cinema's artistic boom. Merjoui and his actor Izzatilla Intezami, the Sean Connery of Iran, are back in Buinak, 3 hours north of Tehran, where they shot the film. It is their first visit in 36 years and the village goes wild.
ما نمیتونیم در رابطه مثلا راجع به کشور فیلم‌های آمریکایی چیزی بگیم. اونا بعد وقتی خودشون همزن بزن و این صحبت‌ها.
I shot The Cow about 30 years ago or so here in this village, and it's quite amazing because still there are some signs of the old village there. It's full of reminiscence, you know, for me. I was very much inclined to use very documentary type of filmmaking, make it very simple and not too much of fancy, camera movement or special cuttings. The style of films which are usually categorized as new realists or realists, you know.
دست شما درد نکنه. اولین بار تو این به مجلسان تعارف کردن شما.
One copy after a year and a half was smuggled to Venice Film Festival, and there it was shown without subtitle or anything. And it was a big success. You know, it won the best prize, and internationally it became very famous. And so other festivals invited the film. So the amount of reputation that brought for the Iranian government, it was so tremendous that they became, a little bit hesitant whether to continue ban it or not, because at the same time, the public was very eager to see the films. Somehow it got its permission. The Cow started a nouvelle vague in the Iranian cinema, so much so that it became a movement in itself. And after 2 or 3 years, they were all over the festivals all over the world. More or less determined, the path that Iranian cinema should follow. More than the prose or the novel or the historical essays or philosophical essays or things like that, mostly our literature is known for poetry. I myself have been very much influenced by both the ancient poets like Hafiz, Maulana, Sa'di, and also the modern contemporary like Nima and Shamlu, Farrokhzad.
The Cow's depiction of the realities of village life so offended the Shah, who wanted to export a prosperous modern image of the country, that the authorities forced Merjoui to add a caption to his film saying that such poverty no longer existed. But he was not the first to combine poetry and stark realism. 7 years before The Cow, in 1962, a short documentary called The House is Black, made in a leper colony, did the same thing. Tracking shots such as this one gave a nobility to the subject matter and are as central as The Cow to an understanding of the birth and distinctiveness of Iranian cinema.
من فکر می‌کنم فیلم تو اون دید و اون نگاه به خوبی فیلم خانه سیاه هست تو ایران ساخته شده باشه. نگاه شاعرانش رو، انسانی دیدنش رو، ساده قصه بیان کردنش رو. میری تو شرایط زندگی جزامیا و اونجا هم زیبایی میبینی، اونجا هم زندگی میبینی، اونجا هم سپیدی میبینی، اونجا هم شعر میبینی.
Director Samira Makhmalbaf isn't the only filmmaker to be influenced by The House is Black. Mania Akbari, who played the lead in Abbas Kiarostami's film 10, is, for the first time, visiting the grave of its director, Farooq Farrokhzad, the innovative Iranian poet and filmmaker who died in a car crash at the age of 32. Farrokhzad was glamorous as well as talented, as this archive shows. The combination made her an icon in Iran in the 1960s. The boldness of imagery like this, as well as Farrokhzad's impact on society, is what inspired Akbari.
فروغ بیشتر از اینکه یک زن باشه یه جستجوگر مسائل درونیش بوده و به همین دلیل اون موقع هم جامعه باش خیلی مسئله داشته، چون خیلی پیشروتر از زمان حال خودش بوده و به همین دلیل زنهای امروز تقریبا یک نوع حالت ستایش‌آمیز نسبت به احساسات و عواطفش داشتن. خیلی زن قدرتمند و آزادی طلبی بوده و میتونسته که به ترساش حاکم شه و این خودش خیلی اتفاق بزرگیه.
من بس حضور تو کجا بروم،
So together, Farrokhzad and Mirjoui, in founding films like The House is Black and The Cow, applied the poetic traditions of their country and documentary techniques to the business of making shots and cuts like these, and as a result set Iranian cinema on a uniquely poetic course. This, then, is the first reason why its movies are so different to ours. Long before Mirjoui and Farrokhzad, Iran was used as an exotic location by foreign filmmakers in works such as this beautifully photographed silent movie, Grass. The country's own film history started unconventionally. In most places it was the working classes who took to movies first, but in Iran it was the Shah. The first indigenous Iranian films were made in the 1920s, but it wasn't until the late 1940s that producers hit on the winning formula of musicals and melodramas, Persianized versions of Hollywood and Bollywood hits. In the 1960s, things changed. A new generation of graduates from the Iranian College of Dramatic Arts began to make an impact. In this building, Abbas Kiarostami established Kanun, the film department of the Institute for the Intellectual Development of Children and Young Adults, and this became the crucible for Iran's artistic emergence in cinema. The Shah reluctantly tolerated the new filmmakers who were emerging, but his regime's pro-Western policies resulted in the Iranian film market being flooded with cheap commercial movies, thus stifling the promising new shoots of the country's indigenous filmmaking. Add to this the elitism and oppression of the regime, and most people agreed that a change was needed in society and in culture. A change there was, and it explains the second reason why Iranian cinema is so distinctive. The Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979 promised liberation from the oppression of the Shah, but punished dissent even more ruthlessly than his illiberal regime. Every aspect of life was Islamicized. Cinema, which many thought of as a Western decadent art form, was particularly affected. 180 cinemas were burnt or closed down, leaving only 256 remaining in the whole country. In one arson attack on a movie house in Abadan, 300 people perished. On his return to Iran from exile, Ayatollah Khomeini made influential comments about cinema. He said that it is part of life and should educate rather than corrupt people. Cinema had been misused, he argued, and that if Islamicized, it could be a vital tool in purifying the country. The new regime's treatment of its people has been denounced by international bodies, including Amnesty International. In the world of cinema, a set of prohibitions were put in place and policed by Farabi, the government film body formed in 1983. All movies had to be submitted to the government to be approved for an exhibition permit. Women were not allowed to be shown doing this. American imports were severely limited. Most expressions of sexual or romantic longing were forbidden. For example, couples were not allowed to touch like this. Also forbidden was any criticism of the Islamic Republic. Less tangibly, films were not allowed to encourage wickedness, corruption, prostitution, addiction, or smuggling, or denigrate people on grounds of race or language. Nor were they allowed to depict disturbing violence or lower the taste of the audience. Much of this was oppressive, but the paradox is that Khomeini was right in one regard. Artistically, at least, cinema did need purifying. Much mainstream cinema in the 70s and 80s was formulaic titillation, concerned with fantasy and escape. In attempting to purify film in Iran and banning American imports, the country's censors unwittingly cleared a patch for a new growth in their country's cinema. On this fertile ground, some of the world's greatest filmmakers would grow. 25 years later, the Iranian film world is too busy doing deals to protest at such censorship, but the strictures remain and government spokesmen still justify them.
عوامل متعددیه که یک فیلم در داخل کشور نشون داده نشه. اما به هر حال ما یه سری اصول اخلاقی داریم که اینا برخواسته از دریافت و درک جامعه‌مونه. یکی از همین فیلم هایی که ایشون مثال زدن، ما در حقیقت شاهد القاء حس یک ارتباط نامناسب جنسی هستیم و اون فیلم فکر میکنم فیلمیه که در هر جامعه اخلاقی دیگه هم اگر به اصول اخلاقی و پایدار و وفادار باشن اون بخشش قابل نمایش نباشه.
But beyond such official speak, there's a real debate to be had about the effect of such limitations. Darius Merjoui argues that the modesty in Iranian cinema is not merely a matter of censorship.
In our culture, the Orientals, on the contrary of the Occidentals, who would like to constantly, tear away and become naked, and they love, nakedness. I mean, look at the Greek, for instance, art or Roman arts, or all the way. On the contrary of the Occidental outlook, the Oriental, they want to cover. So that's why, the women are always covered, the chador, etc. This is not because of Islam, but it's just even before Islam, it was like that.
گاهی اوقات یک جاهای این رو کاملا میپذیرم که محدودیت میتونه خلاقیت به وجود بیاره، اما نه همیشه و همه جا. بعضی وقتا وقتی ترس به وجود میاد تخریب میکنه تمام اون فضا رو. بازم اونجا میتونه یک اثری به وجود بیاد در اثر اون ترس ها، اما هنر ناب نخواهد بود، اون حقانیت رو نخواهد داشت. من فکر میکنم امروزه محدودیت ها توی ایران بی تاثیر نبوده برای خلاقیت زنان.
همیشه من فکر نمی کنم سختی باعث کوچولو شدن آدما بشه. بعضی وقتا سختی باعث میشه آدما بیشتر فکر کنن یا اگر یه شانسی برای بیان عقیده، تجربه، آزادی داشته باشن، اون آزادی رو جدی تر بگیرن. من فکر کنم از اون نظر زنای ما یه عده زیادیشون از حد معمولی پایین ترن و یه عدهشون که شانس اینو آوردن که مثل یه فنری که فشارش دادی یه لحظه رهاش میکنی بالا بزنن، خیلی قدای بلندی دارن و خیلی حرف و ایده‌های بزرگی برای مطرح کردن دارن که شاید زنای اروپایی به دلیل اینکه حالا اون آزادی رو احساس کردن دارن هیچ وقت تو فکر نرفتن که اون آزادی جداً چیه، یا آزادی فقط همین روسریه که سر من رو ورش میدارن، یا همون جایی هم که دامن کوتاه به زور پای من میکنن و پای مرد نمیکنن، با کچلوار همه میرن بالا. این فکره که مطرحه، نه تن. اینطوریه دیگه.
You are pushed into utilizing a language which would be a little bit mysterious and not overtly detectable. Well, that's true. Sometimes it helps purify what you are doing.
Merjoui is surely right. Censorship has made Iranian cinema more allegorical than ours. The films of Kiarostami and of the Makhmalbafs, of Jafar Panahi and Mania Akbari don't state things directly. This makes them echo in our minds, and it also means that they aren't crass. Serious Iranian directors don't use sex or violence to get us to buy a movie ticket. That's a big difference, but there's more. Iran's history and its current prohibitions have certainly shaped the films made there. But the final reason why its movies are unique lies at an even deeper level. As the Tehran Film Festival comes to an end, Iran has the biggest snowfall in 20 years. The city looks completely different. Poet and filmmaker Farrukh Farrokhzad's grave has been transformed from this to this. The routine of city life, you could almost say its surface, disappears. And this is where the filmmakers come in. We've heard so far how poetry and censorship have shaped Iranian filmmaking, but something deeper, something less to do with surface has been in play these last 40 years in the best Iranian films. Take Abbas Kiarostami. Earlier, we looked at his landmark 1986 film, Where is the Friend's House, which was the first of several Kiarostami films to feature the Z-shaped path, which became his signature. Several years after it was filmed, an earthquake in its region killed 50,000 people, including many of the villagers it depicted. Kiarostami's response was to go back to Kokher and make this second film, And Life Goes On, about looking for the boys from the first. The imagery of the second film shows life as a passing scene in a pastoral way, like a constable painting. A Western film would have found something heroic in the rubble, but And Life Goes On was about details, and even, remarkably, remained inconclusive, not revealing whether the boys were in fact alive or dead. But Kiarostami was to make a second return to Kokher. Whilst making And Life Goes On, a local man called Hossein told him that he got married just 5 days after the earthquake.
چطور ازدواج کردی؟
ما انگشتر نامزدی گذاشته بودیم خونه‌شون. تو خواستیم 3-4 روز دیگه به ساق بعد زلزله نمی اومد عقدش کنیم. ازدواج کنیم بیاریم خونه.
This detail so intrigued Kiarostami that he not only put Hossein's story in the second film, but he made a third, Through the Olive Trees, entirely about the making of that small scene in the second. This was unique in film history. Hossein had fallen in love with an actress he was playing opposite, so the third film was about his heartbreaking predicament. But also, far more originally, Through the Olive Trees showed that some moments in real life are so multi-layered that they can be endlessly unfolded.
شما مثل که تازه ازدواج کردین ها؟
بله.
چند وقته؟
5 روز.
5 روز؟ یا 5 ماه؟
5 روز.
خاط.
It seems to me the trilogy is one of the great instances in cinema where not only is it, first of all, about the discovery of sort of a rural community very far away from the world of the filmmakers themselves, but then it's a meditation on that whole act of discovery, that whole act of encounter. What's the responsibility of a filmmaker after he's made a film? What's the responsibility of making a film about that responsibility? So there's a way in which the film becomes endlessly reflected in a way where constantly the filmmaker is going back and asking, what's the meaning of shooting a scene like this? What's the meaning of putting a camera here or filming this particular kind of encounter between characters?
By 2002, Kiarostami seemed even more obsessed by eliminating the barriers between his films and the real world. Using almost no equipment, a tiny crew, and a sparse script, he made 10. Kiarostami had been filming in cars for some years, but in 10 he radicalised his approach by shooting only in the main character's vehicle. He researched the experiences of real people, shaped them into a screenplay, then attached 2 small digital cameras to the dashboard of the car, one filming the driver, the other her passengers. He would later say that such cameras free cinema from the clutches of the means of production. They certainly freed the actors to behave naturally. The following year, Kiarostami made 10 on 10, a masterclass on the making of 10, which he himself wanted dubbed. It was the first making of film to copy precisely the style of its original, as these scenes show.
But I don't believe the job of a filmmaker is to excite or move the viewer merely through creating special moments. By simply showing the reality, one can make people think about their own and other people's acts or behavior, and see and accept reality as it is.
No one else in the world was trying to take the filmmaking out of filmmaking so completely. Kiarostami's experiments became highly influential. Few felt this influence more than Mania Akbari, the actor in 10.
در فیلم 10 آقای عباسی کیارستمی من فکر می‌کنم یه تجربه خیلی جذابی بود در رابطه با برخوردی که با بازی‌ها داشتن. به عنوان مثال بچه‌های مختلفی تست گرفته شد برای اینکه نقش پسر منو بازی کنن. بعد کیارستمی یک روز به این نتیجه رسید که بهترین بازیگر خود پسر منه، به دلیل اینکه بعد از یک مدتی دوربین و سینما فراموش میشد و اون درگیر تمام اون خشمای نهفته‌اش نسبت به مادرش یا نسبت به اتفاقات میشد و خیلی فضا کاملا واقعی پیش میرفت و کیارستامی به هدف نهاییش میرسید.
Soon after it was made, she directed 20 Fingers, 7 unedited conversations between a man and a woman played by Akbari herself. It took Kiarostami's idea that to capture reality, you must look at it long and unflinchingly to its extreme. Take this remarkably complex scene where she and the actor playing her husband are on a motorbike, then she gets into a taxi, then back onto the motorbike, all in the Tehran traffic. In order to emphasize its realism, Akbari filmed it in a single shot without a cut.
از گفتگو و مصاحبه با زنهای ایرانی شروع شد و ابتدا قرار بود یک کتاب بشه با زنهای هنرمند ایرانی و زنهای مطلقه و زنهایی که تنها زندگی میکردن. خوبی زن. آقا لطفاً اون ظرف کم کنید. من میتونم تعریف سینمای ایران رو در یک جمله بگم. سینمای ایران یک سینمای به ظاهر فقیر و از درون غنیه و این یک تعریفی میتونه برای سینمای ایران باشه. اصولاً فکر میکنم سینمای امریکا با سادگی مسئله داره و فکر میکنه که با نهایت سختی و فضاهای متفاوت میتونه توی مردم تاثیر بذاره و یک تجارتی را بندازه.
نگرش دارم میگم آقا.
Health and safety issues alone would prevent this shot being filmed in the UK. A further irony is that the actor on the motorbike is Bijan Danishmand, the film's producer. Like Akbari, Jafar Panahi was influenced by Kiarostami's approach to realism. He worked as Kiarostami's assistant for some years before becoming in the 1990s with films like The White Balloon and The Circle, one of Iran's most acclaimed directors.
من یادمه که یک روز با آقای کیارستمی سوار ماشین بودیم، داشتیم میرفتیم برای بازدید از نمایشگاهشون، توی ترافیک خیلی سختی هم بودیم که داشتیم از مسائل مختلف صحبت میکردیم. آقای کیارستمی برگشت این خبری که در روزنامه خونده بود که یک نفر میره طلا فروشی و نهایتا خودکشی میکنه بهم گفتش.
This was the origin of Panahi's film Crimson Gold, whose style is static and intense.
کلیدا کجاست؟ آقا کلید ندارم من. کلیدا کجاست؟ شلیک میکنم. کلید تو کشوی میز. کدوم کشو؟ کدوم میز؟ صدا برام آشناست. نگاه نکنی برام اگر شلیک میکنی.
Kiarostami, who wrote the film for Panahi, had recently met Quentin Tarantino at a film festival and became interested in Pulp Fiction's portrayal of the banality of the lives of small-time crooks, such as in this scene of thieves simply sitting around talking.
Nobody ever robs restaurants. Why not? Bars, liquor stores, gas stations. You get your head blown off sticking at one of them. Restaurants, on the other end, you catch with their pants down. They're not expecting to get robbed.
Kiarostami wrote such a scene in Crimson Gold.
تو هر کار شرط اول انصافه. حتی تو کاری که شما دارین میکنین. یه شغل شناخته شده است. هزاران نفر تو دنیا مشغول این کار هستن. من خودم سال پیش که رفته بودم اروپا، یکی از همکارای شما، ببخشید همکارای ما، کیف منو که ظاهرا خیلی بهش احتیاج داشت، بیشتر از خودم بهش احتیاج داشت، رو هوا زد و رفت که رفت.
Crimson Gold starts with a jewelry shop robbery in which the robber shoots himself. Then the film rewinds the clock to discover why he did so. The flashback begins unobtrusively. Only gradually do we realize that we've jumped back in time.
آقای کیارستمی رو صدا کردم بیرون، گفتم که به نظرم این خیلی فیلم خوبی خواهد شد، به خصوص که اینطوری شروع بشه و به این گونه است که ما وارد داستان بشیم و تمام اون قواعدی که شاید بارها شکسته شده باشه ما هم دوباره بشکنیم و برخلاف فیلم‌های آمریکایی تماشاگر رو نکشونیم که بگیم که سرنوشت بازیگرمون چیست، سرنوشت شخصیتمون چیست، بلکه شخصیت رو از اول سرنوشتش رو نشون بدیم و او رو کنجکاو کنیم که چگونه به این راه رسیده.
من نمیدونم حسین آقا تو با من مشکلی داری؟
Western gangster films tend to start with an act of violence as a promise of more to come, but Crimson Gold did the opposite, showing the violence of its main character, then, in scenes like this, the numbness of his everyday life.
هیچی خواهش میکنم هیچی نگو
آخه من چیزی نباید بدونم
نه
The work of this man helps explain Iranian cinema's philosophical approach to the real world. Mohsen Makhmalbaf is one of the country's best filmmakers. An ardent Islamic revolutionary in his teens, he was imprisoned for stabbing a policeman, and then, typically, made this remarkable film about the stabbing, in which the policeman not only plays himself, but directs part of the film from his point of view. The result, A Moment of Innocence, was shot simply, had deadpan humour as you can see, and is one of cinema history's great works about the relativity of truth. It played at an astonishing 45 film festivals around the world. By 1996, when he made the film, Makhmalbaf had long abandoned his Islamic fervour in favour of a more complex view of the world. To explain his current beliefs, he often quotes the poet Rumi, that truth is a mirror that fell from the hand of God and shattered into many pieces, each reflecting a unique vision. When his daughter Samira was having such a bad time at state school that she was driven to despair, he turned such conceptual observations into an innovative curriculum and taught her, then many others, himself.
بعد اینطور شد دیگه بابا تو خونه یواش یواش از صحبت شروع شد یواش یواش شکل کلاس به خودش گرفت بابام بهتر از معلمای مدرسه چیزی یاد گرفتم توی اون مدرسه هم کلاسای تئوری داشتیم یعنی مثلا یه چیزی مثلا سبکای مختلف نقاشی یا مثلا قصه نویسی یا مثلا به شکل تئوریک بازیگیری یا مثلا به شکل تئوری خوندن مبانی عکاسی و همین چیزا و یه سری هم کلاسای عملی داشتیم که توی اونا مثلا طراحی می‌کردیم عکس می‌گرفتیم خودمون ظاهر می‌کردیم با دوربین ویدیویی فیلم می‌ساختیم
For example, 1 year they learn psychology, sociology, management, economy, philosophy and Sufism.
بهمون نگاه کردن رو یاد دادن قبل از تکنیک نگاه بود مطرح بود مثلا قبل از اینکه قلم دستمون بگیریم طراحی کنیم یه چیز رو ببینیم یا سبکای مختلف نقاشی رو دیدیم دوره‌های مختلفی که نقاشی مثلا اروپا طی کرده تا به امروز رو دیدیم
Carefully about your looking and hearing is very important. I teach them look and hear. If you hear much more than talk, you can learn how to love everybody.
برای اینکه توی مدرسه اگه میموندم احتمالاً اگه یه ذرم اعتماد به نفس داشتم میگرفتن چون همیشه میدیدی ناخودآگاه نه مثلا فوکوس بهت بگن تو کمتر از مردی یا اینه یا این شغل برای تو نیست ولی به هر حال چون زن بودیم میدیدیم یه چیزایی برای ما ساخته نشده یه جاهایی ما قرار نیست بریم ولی تو خونه ما اینطوری نبود تو خونه ما همونجور که به برادرم نگاه میشد به من نگاه میشد
Samira Makhmalbaf's film The Apple, which she made when she was just 17, was not only the product of her father's teaching, but went on to play at Cannes and be acclaimed around the world.
ولی من خودم هم توی سیب یادم بیشترین فیلمی که یادم میاد وقتی رفتم این فیلم رو بسازم فیلم خانه سیاه است بود برای اینکه اتفاقی بود که من تلویزیون رو نگاه می‌کردم و این یه فیلم مستند داستانی یعنی بیسش از یه داستان واقعی گرفته شده راجع به زندگی دو تا دختریه که پدرشون توی 11 سال اینا رو تو خونه حبس کرده و اینا روابط اجتماعی و زندگی بیرونی ندارن و لحظه اولی که من اینو دیدم برای چند دقیقه تو تلویزیون نفسم بند اومد احساس کردم این میتونست من باشم یه دختر تو فرهنگ ایران پدرم فقط محسن مخملباف نمی بود و این آقا می بود
Instead of having actors in The Apple to play the father and the girls, Samira Makhmalbaf had the real people play themselves. Makhmalbaf says her approach was don't preach, don't judge.
از همونجایی که شروع کنی قضاوت کردن در واقع میخوای دیگه جلو نری، دیگه تجربه نکنی، دیگه حرف کسی رو گوش ندی، دیگه جای دیگه نباشی، دیگه نسبیت رو نپذیری، بگی همش همینه. اونجایی که مثلا توی فیلم سیب اگه قرار بود من قضاوت کنم، ساده ترین راه این بود که بگم اوکی تمام تقصیرها گردن پدر این دوتا دختری که زندانشون کرده و نذاشته که اینا روابط اجتماعی داشته باشن. اما اگه قضاوت نکنی میتونی دوست داشته باشی، میتونی بری حرف طرف مقابلت رو گوش کنی و دلایلش رو بشنوی. یعنی
What the work of all these filmmakers reveals is that beyond questions about the origins of Iranian cinema or the influence of poetry or censorship on it, it's the intensity of their stare at the real world which makes them unique. For Kiarostami, Panahi, the Makhmalbafs and new filmmakers like Akbari, reality is not something to be skimmed over. Instead, they magnify its fine grain and by doing so render it more graceful and even, as Darius Merjuri suggests, optimistic.
Contrary to the commercial cinema, which is mostly exploring the evil side of human beings, either, morally or sexually or in terms of violence and all these things, Iranian cinema, on the contrary, is trying to explore, the good side of the human spirit. In other words, it's trying to analyze or to go deeper into the spirit of the human beings, fulfilling the lack which right now exists in the domain of, cultural domain all over the world.
If Merjuri is right, if the violence in Western cinema doesn't reflect the truth about people, then it is the optimistic realism in Iranian cinema which explains its true distinctiveness. We set out to discover why film in Iran is unique, so this seems to be the end of the story, but it isn't. As we've seen, the small, protected national cinema of Iran has been on a roll for more than a generation now, but some of its key players think it's more imperiled than ever. Potsdamer Platz, Berlin, 2005. The city's international film festival's in full swing. Iranian films are as usual hot tickets. Abbas Kiarostami is again a star attraction. For more than 25 years now, serious filmmakers in this far less glitzy city, Tehran, have, through a potent mix of poetry, prohibition and dedicated realism, been making some of the most satisfying films in a generation. Because of lack of funds or of strongly held beliefs about the role of movies in everyday life, they've been rejecting this type of filmmaking. For this type of filmmaking. They've not been alone in doing so, but have shown us part of the movie spectrum which we didn't really know existed.
ولی یک نگاه به من بده، تاش به من بگه آهان اینطوری هم میشه نگاه کنی، یا نگاه کن ببین یک کس هم اینجوری داره زندگی میکنه، یه تجربه دیگه به من بده. سینمای سرگرم کننده هم فکر میکنم توی شرایط روانی خیلی خاصی که دیگه میخوای به هیچی فکر نکنی، یکم همه چی همینطوری بی دلیل جلوی نظرت بره، خوب باشه. یا سینمای سرگرم کننده شاید برای مثلا
But many Iranian filmmakers Samira's age don't share her analysis.
The young generation of Iranian cinema, they want to say something very new and something different from the other generation. You know that the Iranian cinema usually is presenting something of children and of some old and very slow films, but young generation they're going to tell very quick stories, the stories of the cities.
Masood Bakshi's argument is sincere, but how would the faster films about youth that he wants to make differ from conventional filmmaking around the world? Meanwhile, the people who fought for the distinctive language of Iranian film continue to do so. In Paris, Mohsen Makhmalbaf told us that government censorship in the country has increased, and since he wants to be a free artist, he has left Tehran and will work in India and elsewhere.
یه چیزی مثل از نیچه از پریشب، از این روز که راهم را میروم به کجترین شکل ممکن.
Jafar Panahi also finds the future uncertain.
مثلا من بردن حتی وزارت اطلاعات اینا اولین حرفشون این بود که تو چرا موندی اینجا، برو خارج از ایران فیلم بساز. یعنی دلشون نمیخواد فیلمی داشته باشن که مسئله برانگیز براشون باشه. نمیدونم، شاید امیدوار باید باشیم که سال دیگه بهتر بشه، ولی متاسفانه هر سال داره بدتر از گذشته میشه. نگه داشتن اون میزشون براشون اهمیتشون از منافع ملی یا راهی باز بشه که یک مقدار فیلمسازان یا اهل فرهنگ ما بتونن با مخاطب بیشتر ارتباط برقرار کنن، برای آزادی راهی بازتری باشه. اون میز به نظرم اهمیتش بیشتره و به این دلیله که امسال سختگیری‌های فوق‌العاده‌ای رو دارن میکنن و واقعیت اینه که اکثر فیلمسازای ما من دارم میبینم که الان راهی خارج شدن و میخوان در خارج فیلم بسازن. به نظر من این ضربه مهلکی رو به سینمای ما وارد خواهد کرد. ما اگه میتونیم کاری کنیم تو همینجا هستش، تو کشور خودمون هستش و رفتن اینها در خارج از کشور صدمه جبران ناپذیر خواهد زد.
But are Makmalbaf and Panahi too pessimistic? Here's director Abulfazl Jalali's reading of the same situation.
من فکر میکنم که آره، در مقوله سینما کشور ما یکی از آزادترین کشورهاست. چون من در فرانسه زندگی میکنم، اینطوری نیست که من فرانسه رو نشناسم، اروپا رو نشناسم، در فرانسه زندگی میکنم. به این راحتی نیست. شما فکر کن مثلا یک کارگردانی مثل روبر برسون که خدای سینما است، اصلا یک شخصی مثل من در برابر با روبر برسون اصلا یک ذره در برابر بی‌نهایت. 15 سال میخواست فیلمی به نام آفرینش رو بسازه، نمیتونست بسازه. میگفتیم چرا به این کمک نمیکنین؟ شما که به تمام فیلمسازای دنیا کمک میکنین، چرا به برسون کمک نمیکنین؟ میگفت ممکنه بمیره وسط فیلم چون پیره. میگفتیم خب اگه بمیره هم بخشی از آفرینش، چون اسم فیلمش آفرینش بود، بخشی از آفرینش آفریده و مرده. اینجوریه. ولی مملکت ما چون مردم و مسئولین عاطفی هستن، به هر حال بهتر میشه کار کرد.
If it's easier to make films in Iran, as Jalali suggests, does that help explain the vibrancy of Iranian cinema? And in comparison, the caution of movies made in the West? That, in the end, is the big question. What is certainly true is this: Iranian filmmakers still have a remarkable appetite for new subjects and daring themes. Bahman Gobadi's recent movie Turtles Can Fly showed Kurdish children dealing imaginatively with the war in Iraq. But the ultimate sign of hope is that directors in Iran, more than any others, managed to marry the digital revolution in cinema with profound insights into the rapture and tragedy of human life. The result is poetry. And so our last words are by the poet Hafiz, read by Mahmoud Kalari, Iran's great cinematographer who shot this documentary.
هر که شد محرم دل در حرم یار بماند، با اینکه این کار ندانست در این کار بماند. اگر از پرده برون شد دل من عیب مکن. شکر ایزد که نه در پرده پندار بماند. به تماشاگه ز نقش دل حافظ روزی شد که باز آید و جاوید گرفتار بماند. That's okay.
The season continues at 11:35 when 4 chats to director Kiarostami. And if you'd like to find out more about the rise of Iranian cinema, hit channel4.com/film, where Mark Cousins, the director of this documentary, is online now for a live web chat. Well, next up, a new series, The Explosive 80s.